They towed my tenant's truck at 10 o'clock in the morning, broad daylight, like my parking lot came with a free, I do what I want license. By noon she was in tears. By 3 o'clock I realized it wasn't a mistake, it was a power move. And by the end of that week I knew one of us was about to learn a very expensive lesson. I own a small commercial building in downtown Asheville, North Carolina. Nothing flashy, just red brick, 4 stories, built sometime in the 40s. The kind of place that always smells faintly like old wood and coffee, because somebody on the second floor is always brewing something strong enough to keep a therapist and an accountant alive through the week. It's not a glamorous tech campus, it's steady, an immigration attorney, a graphic designer, a therapist, a couple of accountants, people who show up, do the work, pay the rent on time, the kind of tenants you don't manage, you appreciate. What makes the building special isn't the brick or the windows, it's the parking lot. 12 spaces, clean, painted, clearly marked, metal signs bolted into concrete that say, in letters big enough for a raccoon to read, tenant parking only, violators will be towed. And if you've never tried to park downtown in Asheville, let me explain it like this. Downtown parking isn't a convenience, it's a blood sport. People will circle a block like sharks for 20 minutes over a single spot, so 12 dedicated spaces? That's not just property, that's leverage. For 8 years, there was never an issue, not one tow, not one dispute, not one "hey, is this your lot?" conversation. Everybody respected the lines because the lines were obvious until the building next door sold. It used to be this old insurance office, quiet, beige, forgettable, the kind of place you'd walk past 1,000 times and never once wonder what happens inside. Then a couple from Seattle bought it, cash, closed in 2 weeks, and within days the block looked like somebody kicked an anthill. Contractors everywhere, dumpsters out front, guys in hard hats smoking cigarettes on the sidewalk like it was a social club. They were turning it into some kind of co-working tech incubator. Exposed brick, glass walls, cold brew on tap, all the stuff that makes a normal person feel underdressed just walking by. His name was Ethan Caldwell, and his wife was Marissa, early 40s, startup money, fast talkers, the kind of people who look like they've never waited for anything in their lives without getting annoyed at the concept of time. The first time I met Ethan, I was on a ladder checking a gutter that liked to leak in exactly one spot, like it had a hobby, when he walked over with this big handshake and a bright smile that felt practiced. "Hey neighbor," he said, like we'd been barbecuing together for years. "Looks like we're going to be working side by side." I welcomed him because that's what you do, and I even walked him along the edge of my lot, pointed right at the 12 spaces. "These are mine," I said, plain and simple. "They're deeded to my parcel, my tenants depend on them." He squinted at the asphalt like he was memorizing it for a test, nodded and said, "Got it, won't be a problem, we'll stay in our lane." And I believed him. Maybe that was my first mistake. 3 weeks later my phone rang around 4:30, and it was Carla, the therapist upstairs. Carla's one of those people who has a calm voice by profession. She could probably talk a raccoon out of a trash can, but that day she was furious. "They took my truck," she said. I actually laughed because my brain didn't have a file labeled "somebody stole a therapist's truck at work." So I said, "What do you mean they took it?" "It's gone," she snapped. "I parked in my spot this morning. I had back-to-back clients all day. I walk out, and there's nothing there but a sticker on the pavement." The sticker said Summit Recovery Services. And underneath it, $4.25 to retrieve your vehicle. $425, like that was a casual fee, like we were talking about a nice dinner, not somebody's ability to get home. Something tightened in my chest. Still not panic, not yet, more like that sharp irritation you get when somebody crosses a line they had no business even looking at. I called the number on the sticker, and a man answered on the second ring. Summit Recovery. I told him who I was, gave him the address, and he didn't hesitate, like he'd been waiting for my call. "Yeah," he said, "that tow was authorized by the property owner next door. We were told those spaces belonged to Caldwell Innovation." I remember going still for a second, like my body was deciding whether to be angry or amused. "I am the property owner," I said slowly. "Those 12 spaces belong to me." There was a pause, some paper shuffling. "Sir," he said, "Mr. Caldwell showed us documentation, survey, parcel map, the whole thing. We don't tow on a whim." My jaw tightened so hard I could have cracked a walnut, and I said, "Put him on the phone." 5 minutes later, Ethan picked up like we were catching up. "Hey buddy," he said, casual as a Sunday. "What's up? You had my tenant's truck towed." A soft laugh, like I'd told him a funny story. "We needed overflow parking for contractors," he said. Your signs look old. Marissa thought those spots were part of our lot. Your wife thought wrong. I said, those spaces are deeded to my building. You need to call Summit and pay the fee. And that's when his tone shifted, just enough to notice. Our survey shows the boundary cuts through part of that strip, he said. It's not as clear as you think. It's crystal clear, I said. I've owned this building over a decade. Well, he replied lightly, if there's confusion, let the attorneys figure it out. In the meantime, your tenant can pick up her truck. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't confusion, it was strategy. Street parking was scarce, his renovation crew was everywhere, and my 12 empty spaces during business hours looked like an opportunity, and to him, I wasn't a neighbor, I was an obstacle. I paid the $425 that evening because Carla had clients the next morning, and I wasn't going to let her suffer for someone else's ego. But driving home I kept replaying that little laugh in my head. Your signs look old, like the problem was typography. The next morning I pulled my original deed from my files. Then I called my attorney, Daniel Harper, 60s, gray hair, slow drawl, the kind of lawyer who's seen enough nonsense to recognize it from the smell alone. Daniel reviewed everything: deed, original plat map from county archives, easement agreements from the 1950s, and he didn't even blink. He's wrong, Daniel said flatly. Those spaces are entirely within your boundary, there's no ambiguity. So the tow was illegal? Absolutely, Daniel said. Conversion, trespass, will send a demand letter. The letter went out that afternoon. Cease and desist, reimbursement, confirmation they would not interfere with my property again. Ethan's attorney responded within 48 hours with the slickest letterhead you've ever seen. Polite tone, boundary ambiguity. And then the line that made my eye twitch: they proposed we split the towing cost as a gesture of good faith while the matter was clarified. Split the cost of my own parking lot. And that's when it stopped being about money, because if I gave an inch, symbolically, emotionally, legally, I'd be negotiating ownership of something I already owned. Daniel filed suit, and that's when Ethan decided to turn the pressure up. Over the next month, more vehicles were towed from my lot. Each time, Summit Recovery showed up within hours of someone parking there, like they had a little alarm set for tenant tried to live normally. It was surgical, intentional. My tenants got anxious. They'd call before leaving work, just to confirm their cars were still there. People started whispering in the hallways like we were in some weird office soap opera. One tenant quietly asked if he should start looking for office space elsewhere, and I felt that question like a punch, because that's the whole game. He wasn't just messing with parking, he was messing with my stability. I covered every towing fee, over $1,600 total. Not because I had to, but because loyalty matters, and I wasn't going to let Ethan turn my tenants into collateral damage. After the fourth tow I called Ethan again. This stops now, I said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Then win in court, he replied. Until then, we're operating under our survey. And something in me changed, not rage, not revenge, clarity. If he wanted to play leverage, I needed a better piece on the board. I didn't go to the courthouse the next day, and I didn't storm into his half-renovated tech palace and flip over a reclaimed wood table either. Instead, I drove out to the edge of town where Summit Recovery kept their trucks. It wasn't some glossy corporate headquarters. It was a gravel lot behind a chain-link fence, 2 tow trucks parked crooked, a small office that looked like it had survived 3 different decades without committing to any of them. There was a faded Mountain Dew sign in the window, and a pit bull sleeping in the shade by the door like he paid rent. A man stepped out when I pulled up, late 30s, ball cap, grease on his forearm, solid build, the kind of guy who fixes his own engine because he doesn't trust anybody else to do it right. You lose another one? He asked. No, I said. I'm the landlord from Ash Street. His posture shifted, cautious. Look, he said before I could even get rolling. We only tow when we're authorized. I know, I replied. That's why I'm here. His name was Travis Monroe. He bought Summit from his uncle 5 years earlier. 2 trucks, 3 drivers including himself, a handful of standing contracts with apartments and private lots. It wasn't a gold mine, it was survival. Inside his office it smelled like old coffee and rubber, papers stacked everywhere, a whiteboard with unpaid invoices scribbled in red like a crime scene. I didn't threaten him. I didn't accuse him. I told him the truth. Those 12 spaces are mine, my attorney confirmed it, the court will confirm it, and right now you're towing vehicles that have every legal right to be there. He rubbed the back of his neck. Caldwell showed us a survey, he said. stamped, sign said there was a boundary overlap. We can't play referee. If the property owner calls, we respond. Did you verify with the county? I asked. He hesitated, and that told me enough. We don't have the manpower to run title searches every time somebody disputes a line, he said, and then he added, almost like he couldn't help it. Fuels Up Insurance is killing us, we take contracts where we can. There it was. This wasn't about siding with Ethan. This was about staying afloat. So I asked him real quiet, how's business? Travis gave a short laugh that wasn't funny. You really want to know? Some months are fine, some months I'm deciding which Bill Waite's diesel ain't cheap, and neither are lawsuits. And the moment he said lawsuits, the thought that had been circling in my head finally landed. Ethan's leverage depended entirely on Summit continuing to act on his calls. Remove that, and the whole strategy collapses. 2 days later, I called Travis. What would it take for you to sell? I asked. Silence then. You serious? Dead serious. He named a number that was lower than I expected, 95 grand. I countered at 80. We met at 87.5. I didn't haggle him into the dirt, because that wasn't the point was certainty. I pulled money from a line of credit I'd barely touched in years, signed the papers, assumed the insurance policies, and I kept Travis and his drivers on payroll, at slightly higher rates than before, because I wasn't buying a weapon. I was buying a business, and I wasn't going to punish the people who'd been caught in the middle. When the ink dried, Summit Recovery Services belonged to me. I didn't announce it. I didn't brag. I didn't even tell my tenants yet. The first thing I did was audit every tow from my property. Then I wrote checks reimbursing every single tenant who had paid a fee, and I hand-delivered them, one by one. Carla stared at hers like it might bite. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yes, I did, I told her. You pay rent for peace of mind that includes your parking space. You could feel the building exhale, shoulders loosened, conversations got lighter, and let me tell you, loyalty travels fast in small offices. The second thing I did was review Summit's contracts. Ethan's agreement was month-to-month termination clause, required written notice, no penalties. I drafted the letter myself, had Daniel review it, and sent it certified. Effective immediately, Summit Recovery would no longer provide towing services for Caldwell Innovation, and any future requests regarding Ash Street would be declined due to verified boundary clarification. Then I replaced the signage in my parking lot, same bold lettering, same metal posts, tenant parking only. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed by Summit Recovery Services, call this number. The same number Ethan had been using. Only now, when it rang to my office. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, a white contractor van pulled into one of my 12 spaces like it owned the paint lines. I watched from my second-floor window as the driver got out, glanced at the sign, shrugged. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Summit Recovery, I answered. A confused pause. Yeah, we need a tow at Caldwell Innovation. Same address as usual. Who's calling? I asked, already knowing. A breath then, tight and familiar. Ethan Caldwell. Of course it was. Mr. Caldwell, I said calmly, this is Thomas Reed. Silence, so quiet I could hear traffic through his receiver. Then what? He said slowly. Why are you? You're speaking to the owner of Summit Recovery Services. The line went dead quiet again, then he exhaled sharp, like somebody punched the air out of him. You're joking. I'm not. You bought the towing company? He snapped, like I'd committed a personal insult. Yes. That's insane. Business is business, I said steady. We reviewed the property records. Those 12 spaces are not within your boundary. We will not tow vehicles from property that doesn't belong to you. You can't just. I can, I said gently. It's my company. He hung up without another word. And I didn't feel triumphant, I felt grounded. I hadn't broken a rule, I hadn't cut corners, I just removed the lever he'd been using against me. That afternoon, he marched into my building unannounced, Marissa with him, heels clicking sharply against the tile like punctuation. This is harassment, she said before I could even offer a chair. You're weaponizing a service provider to retaliate against us. I folded my hands on my desk. I purchased a local business that was struggling, I said. I corrected improper tows. I terminated a month-to-month contract. Which part is harassment? Ethan leaned forward. You're trying to choke our operations. No, I said. I'm protecting my property. And you could see it on his face. He wasn't used to resistance. He was used to fast deals, quick leverage, people folding under pressure. He finally said, Fine. We'll see what the judge says. By the time we got to court 2 months later, the air between our buildings felt colder, quiet, contained. No more contractor vans drifting into my lot. No more anxious calls from tenants checking if their cars were still there. Ethan stopped looking at me on the sidewalk, and Marissa wore sunglasses even on cloudy days, which felt symbolic somehow. Buncombe County Courthouse, third-floor fluorescent lights humming just enough to make everything feel slightly unreal. Daniel sat beside me, flipping through a thin binder like he was reading a menu. He wasn't worried, and that helped. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and zero patience for theatrics, reviewed the filings. Daniel presented clean and methodical: deed, original plat map, county survey records, photos of signage, documentation of every tow, every receipt I reimbursed, every certified letter. Then Ethan's attorney tried the reasonable boundary confusion angle, referenced their survey, implied I escalated by acquiring Summit in bad faith. Bad faith, that phrase hung in the air like cheap cologne. The judge leaned back slightly and looked over her glasses. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "did you verify the county plat before authorizing the initial tow?" Ethan hesitated. "We relied on our surveyor," he said. "That wasn't my question," she replied evenly. "Silence then." "No," he admitted. "And after receiving written notice from Mr. Reed's attorney clarifying ownership, why did the towing continue?" He shifted his weight. "We believed the matter was still under dispute." "Belief," she said, "is not the same as legal entitlement." No dramatic gavel slam, no Hollywood speech, just clarity. She ruled the 12 spaces were unequivocally within my property boundary. The initial tow was unauthorized. The subsequent tows after formal notice constituted willful interference. She ordered Caldwell Innovation to reimburse all towing fees, court costs, and attorney fees, just over $14,000. Ethan stared straight ahead when she finished, not at me, not at the judge, just forward, like he was trying to process how something so small turned so expensive. Outside the courtroom, he finally spoke, and it wasn't anger, it was almost disbelief. "You could have just talked to us," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "I did," I replied. He didn't answer. You'd think that would be the end, clean, legal, final, but real life doesn't wrap itself in a bow. Word spread downtown, because business owners talk, property managers gossip, contractors share stories over lunch, and the story wasn't just that Ethan lost a boundary dispute, it was that he tried to strong-arm a neighbor and got outmaneuvered. Some people thought what I did was brilliant. Others thought it was ruthless. One cafe owner told me, "Buying the towing company? That's cold, man." Maybe it was. But here's the part nobody sees from the outside. There were nights during that whole ordeal when I lay awake wondering if I'd gone too far, not legally, not strategically, personally. I've always believed in being a good neighbor, in shaking hands, keeping your word. When Ethan first smiled and said, "We'll stay in our lane," I wanted to believe him. I wanted it to be simple. Then I learned, there's a difference between being kind and being passive. If I'd folded, if I'd split the towing fees as a gesture, if I'd quietly accepted temporary confusion, what message would that have sent to my tenants, to myself, that ownership is negotiable if someone pushes hard enough? So no, buying the towing company wasn't revenge. It was insulation. It was making sure nobody could weaponize a third party against me again. And here's the twist that still surprises people. About 6 months after the ruling, Ethan requested a meeting, not a confrontation, a meeting. We sat in my office, same desk, same window, looking down at the lot that started it all. He looked tired, less polished. The tech incubator had launched, but growth was slower than projected. Investors were asking questions. Construction costs ran over the easy, confidence had leaks in it. "I miscalculated," he said finally. "About the boundary?" I asked. He swallowed. "About you." And I didn't say anything, because what do you say to that? "I thought you'd cave," he admitted, like he was confessing something he didn't want to be true. Most small property owners do. It's easier than fighting. There was the assumption underneath everything. He hadn't seen me as a neighbor, he'd seen me as manageable. "I wasn't trying to start a war," he said. "We just needed parking during renovation. It spiraled." "It spiraled," I echoed quietly, "when you decided your need outweighed my ownership." He nodded once, no argument, just absorbing it. We didn't become friends after that. This isn't one of those stories, but something shifted. A year later, when a delivery truck blocked my loading zone, Ethan sent one of his staff over to help redirect traffic without me asking. Small gesture, quiet acknowledgement. Sometimes consequences teach what conversations can't. And Summit Recovery? Still running. Travis manages day to day. The business is steadier now, more selective. We verify ownership before towing from private, lots no shortcuts. Funny enough, buying that company ended up being one of the better investments I've made. Not because it hurt someone, but because it closed a vulnerability I didn't even realize I had. So here's the question I keep coming back to. Was it too much? Some people say I escalated unnecessarily, that I could have waited for court and saved the 87 grand. Others say if someone plays games with your livelihood, you don't just win, you finish the game decisively. I know how I justify it. I protected my tenants, I defended my property, I stayed inside the law, but I also know there's a thin line between strategic and spiteful, and everybody draws that line in a different place. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have fought it strictly in court and absorbed the stress, or would you have taken control of the lever being used against you? Because sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to remove the tool they're swinging. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this justice or overkill? And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor, a landlord, a boss, anybody who mistook kindness for weakness, I want to hear that story too, because I promise. The real lesson isn't about parking spaces or towing companies, it's about knowing when to stay patient and when to make your boundaries impossible to ignore.